March 21st, 1993. The 65th Academy Awards at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. Nearly 40 million people around the world were watching what was supposed to be a glamorous night celebrating the very best achievements in cinema. The ceremony had been smooth, elegant, and perfectly predictable, just the way the Oscars usually were. The stars were smiling, the cameras were flashing, and the audience inside the theater was enjoying the spectacle of Hollywood at its finest. But behind the scenes, something very different was unfolding. Backstage, legendary actor Kirk Douglas stood in front of a small monitor, watching the ceremony with his hands tightly clenched into fists. At 76 years old, he had spent more than half a century in Hollywood. He had starred in some of the most iconic films ever made. Champion, Lust for Life, Spartacus. His career was built on intense dedication and relentless effort. Even the famous scar on his chin came from a helicopter accident during filming, something he often joked about as proof of how much he had sacrificed for his craft. Yet despite decades of work, something had always eluded him: recognition as a director. When the nominees for Best Director were announced, Kirk leaned closer to the screen. 5 names appeared. Then the final one, Clint Eastwood for Unforgiven. Kirk's jaw tightened. To many people, Unforgiven was a masterpiece, an emotional and thoughtful Western that explored violence, regret, and redemption. Critics praised it, audiences loved it, and the Academy seemed ready to reward it. But to Kirk Douglas, it was something else. A cowboy movie dressed up as prestige cinema. Kirk had grown up in an era when actors trained for years in theater, when directors obsessed over every shot, when filmmaking was treated almost like a sacred craft. In his mind, real directing meant the kind of discipline practiced by legends like Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, or John Ford. Men who planned every frame, demanded dozens of takes, and pushed actors to their limits. Clint Eastwood, in Kirk's eyes, represented something different. A movie star who had simply stepped behind the camera. Standing nearby, Kirk's assistant Jennifer noticed the tension in his face. "Mr. Douglas, are you okay?" she asked softly. Kirk didn't respond. He kept staring at the screen. On stage, the presenter slowly opened the envelope, and the Oscar goes to Clint Eastwood for Unforgiven. The theater erupted into applause. Clint Eastwood stood up from his seat, calm and humble, and began walking toward the stage. Around him, stars like Jack Nicholson and Gene Hackman were smiling and clapping. It was a historic moment. Eastwood was finally being recognized not just as a movie star, but as a serious filmmaker. Backstage, Kirk Douglas stood up. Jennifer immediately stepped back, startled. "Mr. Douglas," she said nervously. "This is wrong," Kirk said quietly. But beneath those quiet words, something deeper was boiling. Years of frustration, disappointment, and jealousy that had never fully disappeared. He began walking toward the stage. Stagehands noticed him approaching. "Mr. Douglas, can I help you?" one of them asked. Kirk didn't stop. On stage, Clint Eastwood had reached the podium and was holding the Oscar in his hands. It was heavier than he expected. The applause slowly faded, and Clint looked out at the audience, clearly moved by the moment. "I want to thank the Academy for this incredible honor," he began. The audience laughed warmly as he added, "When I first started directing with Play Misty for Me, I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I had stories I wanted to tell." Backstage, Kirk Douglas wasn't laughing. He watched the man on stage holding an award that had never been offered to him. Not once in his long career had he even been nominated for Best Director. Jennifer caught up to him. "Mr. Douglas, please, you can't do this." "Can't what?" Kirk replied sharply. "Speak the truth." And with that, he stepped onto the stage. Inside the auditorium, the audience first noticed a strange movement near the wings. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd as Kirk Douglas, one of Hollywood's most legendary actors, began walking straight toward Clint Eastwood. Clint looked up from the podium and raised an eyebrow. Kirk reached the microphone and stood uncomfortably close beside him. "Forgive me for interrupting," Kirk said into the microphone. The room fell silent. I've been in this business for 50 years, he continued, his voice steady but sharp. I've watched Hollywood change. I've watched standards slip. I've watched real artistry replaced by convenience. The audience was frozen. Clint Eastwood simply stood there listening. Kirk, Clint began gently. But Kirk kept going. Clint, I'm sure you're proud of your Western, he said, pointing toward the Oscar. But standing here accepting this award when you've never studied the craft, never trained, never paid the dues. He paused, looking out at the stunned audience. This is a joke. Gasps echoed across the theater. Clint remained calm. Kirk's voice rose slightly as he continued. Directing requires vision, preparation, years of dedication. That belongs to real directors, not cowboys. Security was already approaching the stage, unsure how to intervene. This was Kirk Douglas, after all, a legend. Kirk's hand moved toward Clint's jacket, grabbing his lapel briefly. You don't deserve this, he whispered. That was when Clint Eastwood finally spoke. Kirk, just one word. Calm. Steady. The entire room leaned forward. I think you should sit down, Clint said quietly. Kirk's face turned even redder. Don't tell me to sit down. I'm not trying to embarrass you, Clint replied calmly. I'm trying to save you from something you're going to regret tomorrow. The tension in the room was unbearable. Clint continued, speaking slowly, carefully. Kirk, I respect everything you've done. I grew up watching your films. Champion was one of the movies that made me want to become an actor. For a moment, Kirk's expression softened. But this, Clint said gently, gesturing around the stage, isn't the way to make your point. Kirk's voice cracked. Then what is? How do I make people understand that real artistry is disappearing? Clint looked at him with something that wasn't anger, but understanding. I think you're angry, Clint said, and I think you feel like the industry you helped build has moved on without you. The words hit hard. You've had an incredible career, Clint continued. Films that will be remembered forever. But tearing down someone else's accomplishment won't honor your legacy. It only damages it. The anger slowly drained from Kirk's face. Clint picked up his Oscar again. This award doesn't just represent me, he said. It represents everyone who worked on Unforgiven. When you say I don't deserve it, you're saying none of them do either. Kirk looked down. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Clint nodded. I know you are. Then he extended his hand. For a moment, Kirk hesitated. Then he shook it. The audience, still stunned, slowly began to applaud. Clint turned toward them and said, Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Douglas, one of the greatest actors in Hollywood history. The applause grew louder. Kirk nodded silently and walked off the stage. The next morning, the entire world was talking about the incident. Newspapers, television shows, and entertainment programs replayed the footage again and again. Many criticized Kirk Douglas for losing control, but just as many praised Clint Eastwood for responding with incredible calm and dignity. A few days later, Kirk released a public apology, admitting his behavior had been inexcusable. Clint accepted it immediately. Years later, when Kirk Douglas passed away at the age of 103, people remembered that moment at the Oscars, but they also remembered the decades of extraordinary work that came before it. And they remembered something else. That on one of the biggest stages in Hollywood, in front of 40 million viewers, Clint Eastwood had chosen kindness over humiliation. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't anger. Sometimes the strongest response is grace.